The sun hadn't yet climbed over the jagged peaks of the Sierra Diablo when the first bullet tore through the silence. A sharp crack echoed across the canyon, scattering a flock of crows from the dead cottonwood tree. The air was dry, thick with dust and tension. Colt McAllister didn't flinch. He had been waiting for this moment since the night they burned his ranch to the ground. He crouched behind a boulder, the leather of his duster creaking as he shifted his weight. His revolver was warm in his hand, like it had been waiting to. Across the ravine, 5 men moved like shadows, the red vultures, a gang of merciless outlaws who had carved their name into the bones of the frontier. They were the kind of men who didn't ask questions, didn't leave survivors. And they had made one mistake. They left Colt alive. Another shot rang out, this time closer. A bullet chipped the rock near his shoulder, sending shards of stone into his cheek. Blood trickled down, warm and metallic. He tasted it and smiled. "You boys picked the wrong sunrise," he muttered. Colt wasn't just a rancher. He had once worn a badge, long before the law turned sour and the land turned cruel. He had buried his past beneath cattle and quiet, but the fire had unearthed it. His wife, his son gone in smoke and screams. Now, all that remained was vengeance. He rolled to the side, took aim, and fired. One of the vultures dropped, clutching his thigh and howling. The others scattered, ducking behind rocks and scrub. Colt didn't wait. He sprinted down the slope, boots pounding against the earth, heart thundering like hooves in a stampede. The canyon was a maze of stone and shadow. Every turn could be death. But Colt moved like he belonged to the land, like the dust knew his name. He slid behind a fallen log, reloaded, and listened. The wind whispered through the mesquite. A hawk cried overhead, and then dashed footsteps. He turned, gun raised, just as a figure lunged at him. The outlaw was young, barely more than a boy, eyes wide with fear and fury. Colt hesitated for half a breath, just long enough for the kid to swing a knife. Pain bloomed in his side, sharp and hot. Colt grunted, slammed the butt of his revolver into the boy's temple, and watched him crumple. He pressed a hand to the wound. It wasn't deep, but it burned like betrayal. He kept moving. The canyon narrowed, funneling him toward the old mining shack. That's where they'd hold up, according to the barkeep in Dustwater. Colt had paid for the information with a bottle of whiskey and a promise he didn't intend to keep. As he approached the shack, the world seemed to hold its breath. The wind stopped. The sun peeked over the ridge, casting long, golden fingers across the rocks. And then laughter. It was low, cruel, and familiar. "McAllister," came the voice. "You should have stayed dead." Colt stepped into the clearing. The shack loomed ahead, crooked and splintered. 3 men stood outside, rifles raised. And in the center, leaning against a post like he owned the world, was Silas Crow. Silas had once been Colt's partner. They'd ridden together, fought together, bled together, until Silas sold his soul for gold and power. He had led the vultures to Colt's ranch. He had watched it burn. Colt's grip tightened. "I came to finish what you started," he said. Silas smiled, teeth yellow and sharp. "You're outnumbered." "I'm not outgunned." The clearing exploded into chaos. Gunfire roared, echoing off the canyon walls. Colt dove behind a trough, bullets whizzing past his ears. He fired once, twice. One outlaw dropped, another staggered. Silas ducked into the shack, shouting orders. Colt rolled, ignoring the pain in his side. He moved like a ghost, swift and silent. He reached the porch, kicked the door open, and stepped into darkness, inside. The air was thick with smoke and sweat. Silas stood at the far end, shotgun raised. "You should have died with them," he hissed. Colt didn't answer. He raised his revolver. 2 shots. Silas fell. The silence that followed was deafening. Colt stood there, breathing hard, blood dripping from his side, his cheek, his soul. He looked down at the man who had once been his brother. There was no triumph in his eyes, only sorrow. Outside, the wind picked up again. The sun bathed the canyon in light. The remaining vultures fled, their leader dead, their will broken. Colt stepped out into the morning. The shack behind him, the past buried in gunpowder and grief. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just walked. The land was quiet again, but it would remember. The town of Dustwater was quiet when Colt rode in, his horse limping slightly from the canyon's rough terrain. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the cracked earth. Buildings leaned like tired old men, their wood warped by years of wind and regret. A tumbleweed rolled lazily across the street, as if even it had nowhere to be. Colt's coat was torn, his side still bleeding beneath a hastily wrapped bandage. His revolver hung heavy at his hip, the weight of justice or something darker pulling at him with every step. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching against the gravel, and tied his horse to the post outside the saloon. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and stale whiskey. A piano sat silent in the corner, its keys yellowed and chipped. A few men glanced up as Colt entered, their eyes flicking to the blood on his shirt, then quickly away. Dustwater had seen enough violence to know when to stay quiet. Behind the bar stood a woman Colt hadn't seen before. She was tall, with dark hair pulled into a loose braid and eyes like storm clouds, gray, restless, and full of questions. She didn't flinch when she saw him. Instead, she reached for a bottle and poured 2 fingers of bourbon into a glass. "You look like hell," she said, sliding the drink across the counter. Colt took it, nodding once. "Been through worse." She leaned on the bar, studying him. "Name's Evelyn. I run this place now. Used to be Charlie," Colt said, glancing around. "Charlie's dead. 6 months back." "Vultures?" Colt's jaw tightened. "They're thinning out." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "You had something to do with that." Colt didn't answer. He drank, the bourbon burning its way down like truth. Evelyn didn't press. She poured herself a glass and joined him in silence. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. A storm was coming, not just in the sky, but in the land itself. Colt could feel it in his bones, in the way the air seemed to hold its breath. "You're not just passing through," Evelyn said finally. "No, you looking for something." Colt stared into his glass. "Closure," Evelyn laughed, but it wasn't cruel. It was the kind of laugh that came from knowing too much. "You won't find that here." "Dustwater's fresh out." Colt looked at her. "Then maybe I'll settle for revenge." She nodded slowly. "That we've got plenty of." They talked until the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises and fire. Evelyn told him about the town, how the vultures had taken over the mines, how they taxed the farmers, how they hung anyone who spoke out. Colt listened, each word adding weight to the fire already burning in his chest. When he stood to leave, Evelyn stopped him. "There's someone you should meet," she said. "He's been waiting for someone like you." Colt followed her through the back of the saloon, down a narrow alley, and into a small shack behind the stables. Inside, the air smelled of oil and parchment. Maps covered the walls, marked with red ink and notes. At the center sat an old man, hunched over a desk, scribbling furiously. "Marshal Grady," Evelyn said. "This is Colt McAllister." The man looked up, his eyes sharp despite the years. His face was a roadmap of scars and sunburn, his hands steady even as they trembled slightly with age. "McAllister," he said. "I've heard your name. You used to wear a badge." Colt nodded. "A long time ago." Grady stood, walking slowly toward him. "We need men like you again. The vultures aren't just raiding, they're organizing. Someone's backing them. Someone bigger." Colt frowned. "Silas was their leader." Grady shook his head. "Silas was a pawn. There's a man named Calderon. He's building something. A network. He wants the whole territory." Colt felt the old fire stir again. "Then he'll get a war." Grady smiled, but it was a tired smile. "You'll need help." Colt looked at Evelyn, then back at Grady. "I don't trust easily." "Good," Grady said. "Neither do we." That night, Colt slept in the loft above the saloon. The wind howled outside, and the boards creaked beneath him like whispers from the past. He dreamed of fire, of his wife's laughter, of his son's tiny hands, of the way the sky had turned red the night everything changed. He woke before dawn, the world still wrapped in shadows. He dressed slowly, wincing as he tightened the bandage around his side. He strapped on his gun, checked the bullets, and stepped outside. Evelyn was already there, leaning against the rail, watching the horizon. "You're not the only one with ghosts," she said. Colt nodded. "They don't go away." "No," she said. "But sometimes you can make them hurt less." They stood in silence as the sun rose, painting the town in gold and hope. And then, without a word, Colt mounted his horse and rode out toward Calderon, toward vengeance, toward whatever came next. The dust rose behind him like a promise. The desert stretched out like a forgotten promise, wide, empty, and cruel. Colt rode through it with the sun at his back and a storm in his chest. Dustwater was behind him, but its whispers clung to his coat like ash. Evelyn's words echoed in his mind. Someone's backing them. Someone bigger. Double quotes Calderon. The name felt like rust on his tongue. He'd heard it before, spoken in hushed tones in saloons, scribbled in blood on wanted posters. Calderon wasn't just a man. He was a myth wrapped in muscle and money. A former railroad baron turned warlord, they said. A man who bought towns, broke sheriffs, and built empires from the bones of the West. Colt didn't care about empires. He cared about justice. Or maybe just revenge. The line between the two had blurred long ago. He reached the edge of a dry riverbed by dusk. The sky was bruised purple, the wind sharp with the scent of mesquite and distant rain. He dismounted, letting his horse drink from a shallow pool, and crouched by the fire he'd built from dead branches and old regrets. As the flames crackled, he pulled out a worn leather pouch. Inside were scraps of paper, a silver locket, and a photograph, faded, creased, and precious. His wife's smile stared back at him, soft and defiant. His son's eyes, wide with wonder, seemed to ask him why the world had turned so cruel. Colt didn't have an answer. He stared into the fire, letting the heat bite his skin, letting the memories bite deeper. He remembered the way the house had smelled of cinnamon and pine, the way laughter had filled the air like music, the way it had all vanished in smoke and screams. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried in years, but something inside him cracked, just a little. A twig snapped behind him. Colt was on his feet in an instant, revolver drawn, eyes scanning the darkness. Easy, came a voice. I'm not here to rob you. A figure stepped into the firelight, a woman, younger than Evelyn, with sunburned cheeks and a rifle slung across her back. Her clothes were dusty, her boots worn, but her gaze was sharp. Name's June, she said. Grady sent me. Colt lowered his gun, but only slightly. You're part of the resistance? She nodded. What's left of it? Colt gestured to the fire. Sit, June did, pulling out a tin of beans and warming them over the flames. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd survived too much. Colt watched her, noting the way her hands trembled just slightly when she wasn't looking. How many of you are left? He asked. Not enough, she said. Calderon's men took the mines, the rail lines, even the water rights. Anyone who fights back disappears. Colt's jaw tightened. Then we make them reappear. Loudly, June smiled, but it was a tired smile. You sound like Grady. I used to sound like myself, Colt said. Before the world changed, they ate in silence, the fire casting long shadows across the sand. June told him about Calderon's fortress, a converted rail depot surrounded by mercenaries and barbed wire. She spoke of torture chambers, of stolen children, of towns turned into graveyards. Colt listened, each word carving deeper into his resolve. We'll need more than guns, June said. We'll need allies. Colt nodded. I know a few names, old friends. Some still owe me. June looked at him. And if they don't come? Colt's eyes were hard. Then I go alone. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying with it the scent of rain and war. Colt stood, brushing dust from his coat, and stared into the darkness. Tomorrow, he said. We ride. June nodded, her rifle gleaming in the firelight. And somewhere in the distance, Calderon's empire slept, unaware that a storm was coming. The town of Bitter Creek was a scar on the map, half abandoned, half afraid. Buildings leaned like drunks, their paint peeled by years of sun and silence. The wind carried whispers through the alleys, stories of men who came looking for justice and left buried beneath the dust. Colt McAllister rode in slow, his coat flapping like a warning. June followed behind, her rifle slung across her back, eyes scanning every rooftop. They weren't here for rest. They were here for a name, Jericho Kane, Colt said, dismounting. If he's still breathing, he'll be in the saloon. June raised an eyebrow. You trust him? No, Colt said. But I trust what he owes me. Inside, the saloon was dim and sour. A few men hunched over their drinks, their faces carved by regret. The piano was silent, the air thick with smoke and suspicion. Colt stepped in, boots echoing like gunshots. The bartender looked up, froze, then nodded toward the back. Jericho Kane sat alone, a bottle of rye in front of him and a scatter of bullet casings on the table. His beard was gray now, his eyes sunken but sharp. He didn't look surprised to see Colt, just tired. "Well," Jericho said, voice like gravel, "I figured you'd come calling one day." Colt sat across from him. "I need men," Jericho snorted. "You always did. This time it's different." Jericho leaned back, studying him. "Calderon?" Colt nodded. Jericho poured two glasses. "Then you'll need more than men. You'll need ghosts." They drank in silence. June stood nearby, watching the room like a hawk. Jericho glanced at her, then back at Colt. "She yours?" "She's her own," Colt said. Jericho smiled. "Good. The West eats the weak." Colt leaned forward. "You still have contacts?" Jericho's eyes darkened. "Some, most are dead. Calderon's reach is long. Then we shorten it." Jericho stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll ride." That night, they camped outside town, the stars sharp above them, the fire low and quiet. Jericho cleaned his rifle with the reverence of a priest. June sharpened her knife, her face unreadable. Colt sat apart, staring into the flames. "You ever wonder," he said softly, "if vengeance is just another kind of prison?" June looked up. "Only when it's too late," Jericho chuckled. "You boys think too much. Vengeance is the only thing that makes sense out here." Colt didn't answer. He pulled out the photograph again, tracing the edges with his thumb. His wife's smile was fading, the paper worn thin. He wondered if he was fading too. The next morning, they rode east toward the rail depot, toward Calderon. The land grew harsher, the sky heavier. Every mile felt like a reckoning. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking the valley. Below, Calderon's fortress sprawled like a wound barbed wire, watchtowers, armed guards. Smoke rose from chimneys. Trains rumbled in and out, carrying cargo Colt didn't want to imagine. June pulled out a spyglass. "They've got at least 50 men, Jericho whistled. "That's a lot of dying." Colt's jaw clenched. "We don't need to kill them all. Just one." June lowered the glass. "Calderon?" Colt nodded. "Cut off the head. The body falls." Jericho grinned. "You always did like the hard way." They camped again that night, hidden in the rocks. Colt couldn't sleep. He walked the ridge, the wind cold against his face. He thought of Evelyn, of Grady, of the people who still believed in something. He thought of the ones who didn't have the luxury. He thought of his son. The boy had wanted to be a sheriff. He'd worn a tin star made of scrap metal, chased chickens like they were outlaws. Colt had laughed, then really laughed. It felt like another life. Now, all he had was the memory. He returned to camp, sat beside the fire, and stared into the flames. "We hit them at dawn," he said. Jericho nodded. June didn't speak. And somewhere below, Calderon slept, unaware that the storm had arrived. The sky was still dark when Colt opened his eyes. The stars had begun to fade, swallowed by the slow creep of dawn. The air was cold, sharp against his skin, and the silence was heavy, like the world was holding its breath. He rose quietly, boots crunching against the gravel. Jericho was already awake, crouched by the fire, loading shells into his rifle with the calm of a man who'd seen too many mornings like this. June stood at the edge of the ridge, her silhouette framed by the first blush of light. Colt joined her, staring down at Calderon's fortress. It looked like a beast curled in sleep, barbed wire for claws, watchtowers for eyes. Smoke drifted from chimneys, and the faint clatter of train wheels echoed through the valley. Guards paced the perimeter, rifles slung, unaware that death was already watching. "You ready?" June asked. Colt nodded. "I've been ready since the fire." She glanced at him, her eyes unreadable. "Then let's make it count." They moved quickly, silently. Jericho led them down a narrow path through the rocks, avoiding the main road. The plan was simple: breach the eastern gate, plant explosives near the rail line, and draw Calderon out. Chaos was their ally. Surprise was their weapon. As they neared the outer fence, Colt signaled for them to stop. He crouched behind a boulder, scanning the terrain. Two guards stood near the gate, chatting, rifles resting against their shoulders. Colt turned to June. "You take the one on the left." She nodded, already raising her rifle. 2 shots. 2 bodies dropped. They sprinted to the gate, dragging the corpses into the brush. Jericho worked fast, cutting through the wire with a pair of rusted clippers. The metal groaned, then gave way. They slipped inside. The depot was a maze of crates, tracks, and shadows. Workers moved like ghosts, heads down, eyes hollow. Colt felt a pang of guilt. These weren't soldiers. They were prisoners of fear. He motioned for June and Jericho to split off. June headed toward the rail line, explosives strapped to her back. Jericho disappeared into the shadows, his rifle gleaming. Colt moved toward the central building, a squat, brick structure with iron doors and barred windows. That's where Calderon would be. He could feel it. He crept along the wall, avoiding the lanterns. A guard rounded the corner, and Colt struck quick, silent. The man crumpled, and Colt dragged him into the shadows. He reached the door and paused. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with purpose. He kicked it open. Inside, the room was dim, lit by a single oil lamp. Maps covered the walls, marked with red ink and pins. At the center stood Calderon. He was taller than Colt remembered, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black coat with silver buttons. His hair was slicked back, his face carved from arrogance. He didn't flinch. "McAllister," he said, voice smooth. "I was wondering when you'd show." Colt raised his gun. "It's over." Calderon smiled. "Is it?" The room exploded. Guards poured in from side doors, rifles raised. Colt dove behind a desk, bullets tearing through wood and paper. He fired back, dropping to men, then rolled toward the window. Outside, the depot was chaos. Explosions rocked the rail line. June's work. Smoke billowed and screams filled the air. Jericho was on the roof, picking off guards with deadly precision. Colt smashed through the window, landing hard on the ground. He sprinted toward the tracks, ducking behind crates, firing as he moved. Calderon followed, flanked by 2 bodyguards. They reached the platform, where June was reloading. She saw Colt and nodded, then turned and fired. One of Calderon's men dropped. Colt faced Calderon. "This is for my family," he said. Calderon raised his pistol. They were collateral. Colt didn't hesitate. 2 shots. Calderon staggered, blood blooming across his chest. He fell to his knees, eyes wide with disbelief. "You lost," Colt said. Calderon tried to speak, but the words never came. He collapsed, the empire crumbling with him. The remaining guards fled. Workers emerged from the shadows, blinking in the smoke and light. The depot was theirs now. Colt stood in the wreckage, breathing hard. June joined him, her face streaked with soot. Jericho limped over, grinning. "You did it," June said. Colt looked around. "We did." The sun rose, casting gold across the valley. The storm had passed, but the scars would remain. Colt didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just stood there, the dust swirling around him. The weight of vengeance finally lifted. And somewhere, in the quiet, he heard his son's laughter. The depot was quiet now. Smoke still curled from the shattered rail line, and the scent of gunpowder clung to the air like a warning. Bodies had been cleared, weapons gathered, and the wounded tended to. But the silence wasn't peace, it was exhaustion. Colt stood on the platform, watching the sun climb higher. His coat was torn, his hands stained, and his eyes distant. June sat nearby, wrapping a bandage around her arm, her movements slow and deliberate. Jericho leaned against a crate, chewing on a piece of jerky like it was the last meal he'd ever enjoy. None of them spoke. Victory had come fast and brutal. Calderon was dead. His men scattered. The depot was free, but freedom was a fragile thing in the West, easily claimed, easily lost. A group of workers approached, led by a man with soot-streaked cheeks and eyes that had seen too much. He stopped in front of Colt, head in hand. "You did it," he said. "We're free." Colt nodded. "For now." The man hesitated. "What happens next?" Colt looked around. The depot was still standing, but barely. The rail lines were twisted, the buildings scorched. The people were tired, hungry, and scared. "You rebuild," Colt said. "You take back what's yours." The man nodded slowly, then turned and walked away, his shoulders straighter than before. June joined Colt, her face unreadable. You think they'll make it? I think they'll try, Colt said. Jericho chuckled. That's all any of us ever do. They spent the day helping where they could, clearing debris, organizing supplies, tending to the wounded. Colt moved like a ghost, his mind elsewhere. Every hammer strike, every whispered prayer, reminded him of what he'd lost. By evening, the depot had begun to change. Fires were out, tents were raised, food was shared. The people of Dustwater and Bitter Creek had arrived, bringing hope and stories. Evelyn was among them, her braid wind-blown, her eyes sharp. She found Colt near the water tower, staring at the horizon. You look like hell, she said. Colt smiled faintly. I've been through worse. She handed him a flask. You always say that. He drank, the bourbon warm and bitter. You came. I said I would. They stood in silence, the wind tugging at their coats. You did something good here, Evelyn said. Colt shook his head. I did something necessary. She touched his arm. Sometimes they're the same. That night, the depot came alive. Fires burned bright, music drifted from a battered fiddle, and laughter echoed through the valley. It wasn't celebration, it was survival. A reminder that life could still bloom in the ashes. Colt sat apart, watching the flames dance. June joined him, her face softer than usual. You ever think about leaving? She asked. Colt stared into the fire. All the time. Why don't you? He didn't answer right away. He thought of his wife, his son, the ranch that no longer stood. He thought of the badge he once wore, the promises he once made. Because I owe the land something, he said, and I'm not done paying. June nodded. Then I'll stay too. Jericho wandered over, a bottle in hand. You to look like you're planning a revolution. Colt smirked. We already started one. Jericho raised the bottle. To the storm. They drank, the fire crackling, the stars sharp above them, and somewhere beyond the mountains, beyond the dust and blood, the west waited wild, unforgiving, and full of stories yet to be told. 3 days had passed since Calderon fell. The depot had transformed. Tents became homes. Ashes gave way to gardens. Children played where gunfire once echoed. The people of Dustwater and Bitter Creek worked side by side, rebuilding not just walls, but trust. Colt McAllister watched it all from the edge of the rail yard, his hands resting on the worn grip of his revolver. He hadn't drawn it since the battle, but he kept it close. Peace was a delicate thing in the West, beautiful, but brittle. June approached, her boots kicking up dust. She carried a ledger, its pages filled with names, supplies, and plans. We've got enough food for a week, she said. Water's holding. The new fence is almost done. Colt nodded. Good. She hesitated. But there's something else. He turned to her, eyes narrowing. What a rider came in this morning. Said he's from the territorial office. Colt's jaw tightened. Government. June nodded. Name's Whitmore. Claims he's here to help. Colt didn't move. He stared at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the valley. Where is he? In the old station house. Colt walked slowly, each step heavy with suspicion. The government hadn't lifted a finger when Calderon took over. Now, with the depot free, they came riding in with smiles and papers. The station house was quiet. Inside, Whitmore sat at a desk, dressed in a crisp suit that didn't belong in the desert. His hair was slick, his boots polished, and his smile practiced. Mr. McAllister, he said, standing. A pleasure. Colt didn't shake his hand. You're late, Whitmore chuckled. We move at the speed of policy. Colt leaned against the doorframe. Policy didn't stop Calderon. No, Whitmore said. But it can stop what comes next. Colt's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? Whitmore opened his briefcase, pulling out a stack of papers. The depot is now under provisional government control. We'll be assigning a magistrate, organizing trade routes, and ensuring compliance with territorial law. Colt didn't blink. You mean taking over? Whitmore smiled. We mean stabilizing. Colt stepped forward, voice low. These people fought for this place, bled for it, buried their dead in its soil. You don't get to walk in and claim it. Whitmore's smile faded. You're a war hero, Mr. McAllister. But war heroes don't build towns. Bureaucrats do. Colt stared at him, the silence thick. I'm not giving you this depot, he said. Whitmore shrugged. Then we'll take it. Colt turned and walked out, the door slamming behind him. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying dust and tension. June met him halfway, her face tight. What did he say? Colt looked around the tents, the people, the hope. He said we don't belong here. June's jaw clenched. Then we show him we do. That night, Colt gathered the town. They met in the rail yard, lanterns casting flickering light across tired faces. Evelyn stood beside him, her arms crossed, her eyes fierce. Colt spoke slowly, clearly. They want to take what we built, wrap it in laws and papers, turn it into something they can control. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. But this depot isn't theirs. It's ours. We earned it. We defended it. And if they want it, they'll have to fight for it. Cheers rose, fists clenched. The people were ready, but Colt wasn't sure if he was later. He sat alone by the water tower, staring at the stars. Evelyn joined him, her coat wrapped tight against the wind. You did good, she said. Colt didn't answer. She touched his arm. What are you afraid of? He looked at her, eyes hollow. That I'll become what I fought. She nodded. Then don't. They sat in silence, the wind whispering through the valley. And somewhere in the dark, Whitmore wrote his report, cold, calculated, and dangerous. The morning after Colt's speech, the depot felt different. The air was still, but not calm. People moved with purpose, but their eyes darted toward the station house more often than toward the rising sun. Whitmore hadn't left. He hadn't even flinched. Bureaucrats didn't need bullets, they had pens. And Colt knew that ink could bleed a town dry just as fast as gunpowder. June found him near the water tower, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate strokes. He's meeting with Evelyn, she said. Colt paused. Why? Says he wants to understand the leadership structure. Colt stood, slipping the knife into his belt. He's looking for cracks. June nodded. Then we don't give him any. They walked together to the saloon, which had become the depot's unofficial town hall. Inside, Evelyn sat across from Whitmore, her arms folded, her expression unreadable. Whitmore smiled as Colt entered, but it didn't reach his eyes. Mr. McAllister, he said. We were just discussing governance. Colt didn't sit. You mean control? Whitmore chuckled. Words are flexible. Like laws. Evelyn stood. He wants to appoint a council. 5 members. 1 vote each. Colt's jaw tightened. And who picks the 5? Whitmore spread his hands. The people, of course. Democracy. Colt looked around the room. A few townsfolk had gathered, listening. Some nodded. Others frowned. The depot was a patchwork of survivors, not politicians. Democracy sounded good until it was used to install a leash. You want a vote? Colt said. Fine, but not until we know who's pulling your strings. Whitmore's smile faded. I represent the territorial office. And who do they represent? Whitmore didn't answer. That night, Colt met with Evelyn and June in the old telegraph shack. Maps and supply lists covered the walls. Jericho leaned against the door, chewing tobacco and watching the shadows. We're losing them. Colt said. Whitmore's got words. We've got scars. Evelyn nodded. People want peace. He offers it. June frowned. But it's not real. Jericho spit into a tin. Doesn't matter. Real or not, it's shiny. And folks like shiny. Colt paced. We need proof. Something that shows what he's really after. June stepped forward. Then we dig. They split up the next morning. June searched Whitmore's quarters. Jericho talked to the workers who'd arrived with him. Evelyn met with the townsfolk, listening for whispers. Colt rode out to the edge of the valley where the telegraph lines still hummed with secrets. He found the operator a thin man with ink-stained fingers and nervous eyes. You seen Whitmore's messages? Colt asked. The man hesitated. I'm not supposed to say. Colt leaned in. You want this depot to stay free? The man nodded slowly, then handed over a stack of papers. Colt read them by lantern light. Each word a dagger. Whitmore had already declared the depot a strategic asset. He'd requested reinforcements. He'd listed Colt as a volatile element. And he'd proposed a plan to install a military overseer within the week. Colt returned to the depot with fire in his veins. He called a meeting in the rail yard. Lanterns flickered. Faces gathered. Whitmore arrived, flanked by 2 men in gray coats, new rivals, armed and silent. Colt held up the papers. This is what he's planning, he said. Military control. No vote, no council. Just orders. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whitmore stepped forward, calm as ever. Those documents are classified, he said. Colt's voice was steel. They're ours now. Whitmore looked around, calculating. You're making a mistake. Evelyn stepped beside Colt. No, you did. The crowd surged. The graycoats backed away. Whitmore was escorted to the edge of town, his briefcase clutched like a lifeline. Colt watched him go, but he didn't feel triumphant. Later, he sat alone by the fire, the papers in his lap. June joined him, silent. You did the right thing, she said. Colt didn't look up. Then why does it feel wrong? She didn't answer. The wind whispered through the depot, carrying the scent of smoke and change. And somewhere beyond the hills, Whitmore's reinforcements rode slow, silent, and inevitable. They came at dawn. Dust rose on the eastern horizon like smoke from a distant fire. The sun hadn't yet cleared the hills when the first silhouettes appeared, mounted men in graycoats, rifles slung, faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats. 20 strong, maybe more. Colt stood at the edge of the depot, watching them approach. His revolver was holstered, but his hand rested on the grip. June stood beside him, her rifle ready. Jericho paced behind them, muttering curses under his breath. They're early, June said. They're confident, Colt replied. The riders stopped just outside the depot's perimeter. Their leader dismounted, a tall man with silver hair and a polished badge that gleamed in the morning light. He walked forward slowly, hands visible, posture relaxed. Marshal Royce, he said. Territorial office. Colt didn't move. We've met your kind. Royce smiled. I'm not Whitmore. No, Colt said. You're worse. He used words. You use guns. Royce's smile faded. We're here to restore order. Colt stepped forward. There is order. You're here to claim it. Royce looked around the tents, the people, the rebuilt rail line. This depot is a strategic asset. We have orders to secure it. Colt's voice was low. You'll have to go through me. Royce didn't flinch. I was hoping you'd say that. He turned and signaled. The riders spread out, forming a perimeter. The depot stirred, workers grabbing tools, mothers clutching children, Evelyn rallying the townsfolk. June leaned close to Colt. We can't win a shootout. We won't, Colt said. Not yet. He walked toward Royce, stopping a few feet away. Let's talk. Royce nodded. Good. I prefer diplomacy. They met in the saloon, the same place Whitmore had tried to charm his way into power. Now, it was a war room. Maps covered the tables. Guns lined the walls. Evelyn stood behind Colt, arms crossed. June sat near the door, watching every move. Royce removed his hat, set it on the table, and leaned forward. You've built something impressive, he said, but it's fragile. One wrong move, and it crumbles. Colt didn't blink. Then don't make the wrong move. Royce smiled. I'm offering a compromise. We install a magistrate. You keep your counsel. We share authority. Colt leaned in. And who makes the final call? Royce's smile widened. We do. Evelyn stepped forward. That's not compromise. That's conquest. Royce turned to her. It's survival. The room fell silent. Colt stood. We'll discuss it. Royce nodded. You have until sundown. He left, his boots echoing like a countdown. Outside, the depot buzzed with tension. People gathered in clusters, whispering, worrying. Some wanted to fight. Others wanted to surrender. Most just wanted to live. Colt met with his counsel, Evelyn, June, Jericho, and 2 others from Bitter Creek. They sat in the telegraph shack, the air thick with dust and dread. We can't win a war, Jericho said. Not against trained men. We can't give up either, June said. Not after everything. Evelyn looked at Colt. What do you think? Colt stared at the map. We stall. We negotiate. And if they push, we push back harder. Jericho grinned. Now you're talking. That afternoon, Colt walked the depot. He spoke to the people, listened to their fears, their hopes. He saw children playing near the water tower, old men repairing fences, women baking bread in clay ovens. This wasn't just a depot, it was a home. He returned to the saloon just before sundown. Royce was waiting. Colt sat across from him. We've decided. Royce raised an eyebrow. And we'll keep our counsel? We'll manage our own affairs. You can stay as an observer. Nothing more. Royce's face darkened. That's not the deal. It's the only deal, Colt said. Royce stood. Then you've chosen war. Colt didn't flinch. We've chosen freedom. Royce turned and left. That night, the depot prepared. Guns were loaded. Trenches dug. Lanterns dimmed. The people didn't sleep, they waited. Colt stood on the roof of the station house, staring at the stars. June joined him, silent. You think we'll survive? She asked. Colt didn't answer. He just watched the horizon. And somewhere in the dark, the riders waited, silent, patient, deadly. The sun hadn't yet broken the horizon when the first shot rang out. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just a single crack, sharp, sudden, and final. A warning. A message. A line drawn in the dust. Colt McAllister was already awake, standing on the roof of the station house, watching the eastern perimeter. He didn't flinch at the sound. He'd known it was coming. The only surprise was how quiet it was. Below, the depot stirred. June sprinted across the yard, rifle in hand, her braid whipping behind her. Jericho barked orders near the trenches, rallying the townsfolk. Evelyn emerged from the saloon, her coat flapping like a banner, her face set in stone. Colt climbed down, boots hitting the gravel with purpose. They fired first, June said, breathless. Colt nodded. Then we finish it. The depot had been preparing for days. Trenches lined the outer fence. Barricades blocked the main road. Watch posts had been built from scrap wood and iron. It wasn't a fortress, but it was enough. Royce's men advanced slowly, rifles raised, eyes scanning. They didn't charge. They didn't shout. They moved like professionals, cold, calculated, efficient. Colt stood at the center of the yard, surrounded by his council. He looked each of them in the eye. No one fires unless fired upon, he said. We hold the line. We protect the depot. We don't become them, Jericho grunted. They already became something worse, June nodded. We're ready. Evelyn didn't speak. She just loaded her revolver and stepped into position. The first wave came at sunrise. Royce's men opened fire from the ridge, bullets tearing through the outer fence. The depot returned fire, measured, precise. Colt moved between posts, shouting orders, helping the wounded. Dust filled the air. Smoke curled from shattered crates. The scent of gunpowder clung to everything. A young boy no older than 12 ran past Colt, carrying water to the front line. Colt grabbed his shoulder. Stay back, he said. The boy looked up, eyes wide. I want to help. Colt knelt. You already are. He sent the boy to the shelter, then turned and fired at a shadow near the fence. The man dropped. Colt didn't pause. By midday, the depot was holding but barely. Ammunition was low. The barricades were splintered. The wounded outnumbered the fighters. Royce hadn't broken through, but he hadn't retreated either. Colt gathered his council in the telegraph shack. We can't hold forever, Jericho said. June wiped blood from her cheek. We don't need forever. Just long enough. Evelyn looked at Colt. What's the plan? Colt stared at the map. We hit their supply line. Cut off their ammo. Force them to retreat. Jericho grinned. You always did like the bold moves. June nodded. I'll go. Colt shook his head. I will, they argued. But Colt didn't budge. He slipped out at dusk, moving through the canyon like a shadow. He knew the land better than Royce's men. He knew where they stored their ammo, an old barn near the ridge. He reached it by nightfall. 2 guards stood outside, bored and careless. Colt waited, then struck quick, silent. He slipped inside, found the crates, and lit the fuse. The explosion rocked the valley. Back at the depot, Royce's men panicked. Their fire slowed. Their formation broke. Colt returned just before dawn, bloodied but alive. The depot surged. Jericho led a counterattack, driving the riders back. June took the ridge. Evelyn rallied the townsfolk. Royce's men retreated, scattered, wounded, defeated. By noon, the depot was quiet again. Colt stood in the yard, watching the smoke drift into the sky. The people gathered around him, cheering, crying, holding each other. They had won. But Colt didn't smile. He walked to the edge of the depot, stared at the horizon, and whispered to the wind, "We're not done." The depot was quiet again, but not peaceful. The smoke from the battle had long since drifted into the hills, but its scent lingered in the wood. In the clothes, in the memories. The wounded were tended to, the dead buried in a patch of land behind the water tower. A crude wooden cross marked each grave. Colt McAllister carved them himself, one by one, in silence. He didn't speak much in the days that followed. He walked the depot like a ghost, nodding to townsfolk, helping where he could, but always with that distant look in his eyes, the kind of look that said he'd won the fight, but lost something deeper. June watched him from afar, her rifle now resting more often than raised. She'd seen men like Colt before, men who carried the weight of survival like a curse. She wanted to speak to him, to pull him back from wherever he'd gone, but she knew better than to chase a man into his own shadow. Evelyn, on the other hand, didn't wait. She found Colt near the graves, kneeling beside a fresh mound of earth. His hands were stained with soil. His coat hung heavy on his shoulders. "You're not the only one who lost someone," she said. Colt didn't look up. "I know." Evelyn crouched beside him. "Then stop acting like you are." He finally turned to her, eyes hollow. "I buried a boy yesterday, 12 years old. He wanted to help." Evelyn nodded. "He did." Colt looked away. "I told him to stay back. You did what you could." Colt stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "It wasn't enough." Evelyn grabbed his arm. "It never is. That's the truth of it." They stood there for a long moment, the wind whispering through the depot, carrying the scent of rain and regret. Later that day, the council met in the telegraph shack. Jericho was already there, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate strokes. June leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Two new members had joined, one from Dustwater, one from Bitter Creek. Both had fought in the battle. Both had scars. "We need to talk about what comes next," Evelyn said. Jericho snorted. "We rebuild. We reload. We wait for the next bastard in a badge." June shook her head. "We can't live like that." Colt sat at the head of the table, silent. The man from Dustwater, Reyes, spoke up. "We need structure. Real leadership. Not just guns and grit." The woman from Bitter Creek, Martin, nodded. "People are scared. They need something to believe in." Colt finally spoke. "They believed in the depot. In each other. That's enough." Reyes leaned forward. "It was enough for war. Is it enough for peace?" The room fell silent. Evelyn looked at Colt. "You could lead them." Colt shook his head. "I'm not a leader. I'm a fighter." June stepped forward. "Then fight for peace." Colt looked around the room, the maps, the weapons, the tired faces. He thought of his son, of the tin star he used to wear, of the promise he'd made to protect. "I'll try," he said. That night, the depot held a gathering. Not a celebration, something quieter. A moment to breathe. Lanterns lit the rail yard. Music drifted from a fiddle. Bread was shared. Stories told. Colt stood at the edge, watching. A young girl approached him, holding a flower. "For the graves," she said. Colt took it, nodded, and walked to the patch of earth behind the water tower. He placed the flower on the boy's grave, then sat beside it. He didn't cry, but he didn't feel hollow anymore. The depot was still standing, and so was he. The morning sun rose slow and golden over the depot, casting long shadows across the rail yard and warming the rooftops with a soft glow. The dust had settled. The trenches were filled. The barricades had been taken down. What remained was a town, not a battlefield. Colt McAllister stood at the edge of the water tower, his coat flapping gently in the breeze. His revolver was holstered, but it felt heavier than ever, not from the weight of steel but from the weight of memory. He looked out over the depot, watching children chase each other between tents, women hanging laundry, men repairing fences. Life had returned. Behind him, Evelyn approached quietly. She didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. "You're leaving," she said. Colt nodded. "I've done what I came to do." Evelyn folded her arms. "You built this place. You bled for it." "I didn't build it," Colt said. "They did. I just made sure it had a chance." She stepped closer. "They still need you." Colt turned to her, eyes tired but clear. "They need someone who believes in tomorrow." "I'm still living in yesterday." Evelyn didn't argue. She knew better. She'd seen the way Colt stared at the graves behind the water tower, the way he touched the photograph of his wife and son like it was the only thing, keeping him tethered to the earth. "You'll come back?" she asked. Colt smiled faintly. "If the wind brings me." That afternoon, The town gathered in the rail yard, not for a speech, not for a ceremony, just to say goodbye. Jericho stood off to the side, chewing tobacco and pretending not to care. June leaned against a post, arms crossed, eyes soft. Reyes and Marta from the council offered Colt a satchel of supplies and a map marked with safe trails. Colt mounted his horse slowly, the leather creaking beneath him. He looked down at the people, his people, whether he admitted it or not. He saw the boy who had once carried water to the front line, now helping his mother stack firewood. He saw the old telegraph operator, now teaching letters to children on a chalkboard. He saw Hope. He tipped his hat. "Keep it standing," he said. Evelyn stepped forward. "We will." Colt turned his horse toward the west, where the land stretched wide and wild. He didn't look back, not because he didn't care, but because he knew they'd be watching. And he wanted them to see a man riding into legend, not away from it. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of mesquite and memory. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in bruises and fire. And Colt McAllister rode on into the dust, into the silence, into whatever came next. He didn't know where the trail would lead, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't need to, because the depot stood. And that was enough.